Again, good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us for today's webinar with Rodney Rulon, Rulon Enterprises. So let me go ahead and introduce Rodney to you. He will have his contact information up at the end of his webinar as well. Rodney and his family farm up in north central Indiana near Arcadia. It's like a 7-generation tradition up there. The year before last, I believe it was 2 years ago, he gave a presentation at the Indiana Association of Soil and Water Conservation Districts annual meeting on these decisions that a farmer really has to make, both management-wise and economic-wise, when you're asking them to adopt a conservation practice. So he's updated that content, and he's going to do a bit of a reprise today. On his farm, Rodney manages the farm draining system, the soil sampling, fertility, and of course, the conservation program participation. He also develops the farm's cover crop program and really hones in on that soil health for Rulon Enterprises. So Rodney, if you would please, let's go ahead and start your screen share.
Very good. Well, good morning, everyone. This is quite an interesting format we've got here today. I guess we're all getting used to these electronic meetings. It's a little different for me than looking out. A lot of you I know that are signed on are people that I've seen in meetings before when I've either been sitting in the audience or looking out, and so I miss those interactions. That was always one of the best part about having these meetings, was getting to see y'all face to face and talk about what's going on the farm. But we're gonna see if we can make this work today. The good news is most of you, I think, from being around Indiana, are in the same situation we are. If it was an in-person meeting, it would have been canceled anyway. So it's pretty nasty outside. So it's nice to be inside and not have to get out. So we can all enjoy that certainly today. And the other benefit, I think, is we've got people from all over the place today, which is really awesome as a group. I hope we get to have some interesting questions at the end and things. The geography and travel times don't limit us near like they do for in-person meetings. So I'm looking forward to giving this a try. As I understand the attendees, there's really two groups of people, two primary groups of you out there. One would be who I'm going to address in the first part of this webinar, which is the um, conservationists, agency employees, salespeople, people that are coming to me as a farmer and asking me to do something, right? And so that's kind of the key to this presentation in the title. So you want me to change how I farm. So you've got an idea. So for those of you, we'll address some of the things that are going through farmer's head in the first part of this, and then in the second part, we're going to continue to address you, but then go ahead and talk about some of the things that you have to offer, and talk to the other farmers out there about the ways that conservation can play a role on their farm and help their farm. So um, we'll just start with a little bit of my credentials for those of you out there, like I said, with a bigger geography. I know there's people out there who I don't know. Um, so just a little bit of background. We are multi-generation. So I have fifth generation on here. Uh, Lisa said seventh, and both of those are true depending on which side of the family you go with. Um, but anyway, multi-generational, a long time here in Indiana, just north of Indianapolis. So we're actually here. Most of our water flows down into the drinking supply for Indianapolis. So that has its own special issues and concerns for us. We started no-tilling around 1989 on the whole farm. We did a little bit of no-till before that, but um, we've got quite a few years now, 30 plus years of experience no tilling. Um, about 6,500 acres this year, I think, of corn and soybean rotation. We don't have any wheat. We don't have any other um, alternative crops. So what I'm going to talk about is specific to corn and soybean rotation in central Indiana. I'm not an expert on wheat. I'm not an expert on some other crops or other localities. So this is what works for us, and that's one of the good things about being a farmer. I get to tell you what works for me, and this may or may not work for you. So um, we've been using cover crops for a long time. Uh, as a way to enhance our no-till system and improve our soil health, and we're going to talk about that in the second half. Um, we do fairly intensive management of everything, and that's um, we've been doing 1 acre grid soil fertility management and variable rate application since the 90s as well, and I think that plays into the system of the way we approach things. So I'll just give you my perspective here that I always like to include is that on our farm, conservation is the best economic model. Um, we're accountable for what leaves our farm. I spoke about our location and where our water goes and things, but all of us as farmers today are responsible for what leaves our farm. And we believe we're a legacy farm. We we want to leave this farm for our children and the next generation. So those are the perspectives of where I'm coming from, a little bit of my background. And so from there, we're going to just go ahead and get into kind of the meat of this thing. So as I promised, we're going to start out the first part here. There's a lot of words on these slides, and I apologize for that, but a little bit of that is to make the point, right? So um, things are complicated on the farm. It's uh, it's not just get up in the morning and go out to the shop and get some equipment ready and those things. There's a lot of decisions to be made today. So I broke down our key um, things, key enterprises, I guess, or facets of farming, and just we're not going to talk about every one of these because you're all aware of them, but I think it's important as you go um, and pull in the driveway. So if you're um, a government employee and you've got a great program that you want me to participate in an equip program or uh, do a cover crop test or something like that, and you pull in my driveway, and I might be grumpy today, and it might be a whole bunch of things, but it probably doesn't have anything to do with what you did. But unfortunately, I might be worried about the weather, worried about what my yields are, uh, trying to pick the right varieties, working on seed and chemical combinations. We've got all the GMO and non-GMO and organic and every other variation of all those things. We got a lot of logistics going on, planting, harvest, people running every which way, a lot of equipment, you know, a lot of things to worry about there. Grain drying, all of these things, right? So any one of these things could be more important in my mind today uh, than incorporating a new practice that's just going to add another thing to the list, right? So these are all production issues that we might deal with. Now, at the same time, we deal with financial issues, and these can be really stressful for us as farmers. And I think we're all familiar with these things, but if it's your family farm and your retirement and your cash flow, your ability to pay for your kids' college, all those things on the line. Um, Once again, if I'm worried about talking to my banker and figuring out where I'm going to get money to plant the crop, and you want me to get some more money to go ahead and plant a cover crop, uh, then that might make me a little grumpy. So, um, there's just a lot of things financially that can be a burden, and there's conservation practice. There's huge benefits to conservation practices, and we're going to get into those. But we have to remember sometimes those also come with financial costs up front, and you need to be prepared to address those and how we're going to deal with that. Right, that's always one of the biggest questions I get in talking about cover crops is, well, that's great, but does it pay? Right? Is it going to pay for itself because I don't need any more expenses? And so these are some of the things that play into that. Um, maybe other enterprises, other businesses. Certainly for us, we have seed dealerships and a hog farm and a drainage business, um, rental properties, any number of other things. We have a website that we manage with, called the Peer Network, and um, that's one of the things that we interact with people on and those kind of things. So, there's all of these things that can be going on, and so it's not just as simple as, hey, it's a beautiful day and uh, coming out to my farm is a great way for you to get out of the office, but I may have a lot of these things going on. So, um, and then there's the pull of all of this, right? So, and this is to me some of the fun, right? This is one of the neat things about being a farmer is you have all these opportunities with family and community, but sometimes we can get pulled a little thin. We can get going every which direction. We can that family and work balance and all of our relationships with people in business and church and community and you know school boards and soil and water boards and all of these different things. Time management can be key, and some days we're going to be stretched a little thin, and I might just say, hey guys, I don't have time to take on another project, even if this is a great conservation tool. I can't manage another thing right now, and I think we've all felt that and can understand that. But it's something to keep in mind. That doesn't mean that I don't like you. It just means there's a lot of things going on. Um, we're all familiar. This is an area where we could use a lot of help and guidance because these programs, the government conservation programs, can get very complicated, very time consuming, and um, sometimes you kind of wonder if it's worth all of the effort and paperwork and this and that. But at the same time, we know that there's benefits, and these are something that leads into kind of our other part. These programs can really help us in improving our farm. They can help with price issues like we've had on and off over the last couple of years with things beyond our control. Obviously, 2020, the whole year was beyond our control, but luckily for us in Indiana, I think as farmers it worked out better than for a lot of people. Um, so anyway, we have to manage all of these things, um, and what it comes down to then is where does conservation fit into my farm business plan or your farm business plan as a farmer? So that's really where we get into the next part of this and looking at how um, conservation fits in for the farmer and how that can be important enough to overcome all of these other hurdles uh, where we're competing for time. Really, it just comes down to this. conservation can can provide hope for the farm and the farmer. And that sounds a little hokey or whatever, but really to me, conservation is a tool that helps me see beyond all of those other things that we were just going through, from day to day that can get overwhelming, and the little things that can just eat at you and pull you down. But when you look at what you can do with these conservation practices, then you're talking about something that starts to matter and leave things for the future. So, um, you know, so what can conservation bring to our farm, right? So financial stability. Um, that's a great, if you're going in and coming in to talk to me, I already said finances are one of my greatest concerns. So if you can prove to me that these conservation practices can bring financial stability, whether it's from increasing the yield, reduced variability has a lot of value. Whether it's within the field, we've improved our productivity on some of the less productive hilltops and things like that through no-till and things, or if it's year-to-year variability, where we've reduced our impacts from weather variability and those kinds of things. Um, Landlord relationships have been a great our stability and relationships with our landlords since we've begun planting cover crops and doing a lot of these conservation practices. Um, they developed this loyalty to the goal. It's the best way I can think of to say it, where we really uh, can share with them why we're doing what we're doing and how we're improving their farm and improving their community. That really resonates with the next generation, uh, and people who want more than just the most dollars. I mean, you're always going to have those. There's always going to be some people who just are going to take their farm to the highest bidder, and we're probably not going to be the person they rent to, because we're working with landlords and working with the next generation of landowners at this point, in many cases, sometimes the third or fourth generation uh, that we have worked with, and they're interested in what we're doing to improve that farm and to improve the community. Um, there's an opportunity now. It's been a lot in the news of carbon credits. Uh, and switching to some of these practices is really going to set you up for some good uh, income with some of these programs that I think is going to help overcome some of the costs. And then, of course, all the standard government programs, EQIP and CSP and all those things, and we'll have some of those in the budgets later. Um, so, what else can it do? What else can conservation bring? There's an environmental impact, um, and that's really important. It doesn't have a direct payback to to me necessarily today, but we have reduced erosion, improved nutrient efficiency, um, reduction in applied nutrients, uh, less loss through runoff and leaching. I mean, those are super critical. We use less fuel because we're making less passes, doing less tillage with big equipment, which reduces our carbon footprint. We have improved water quality both on and off the farm, uh, improved biologic diversity, and reduce pesticide use, through integrated pest management and those practices. So certainly that's critical. Um, there's a legacy aspect to conservation that that's important to me as my kids get older and I look at passing the farm on, and I think it's and I look at my community that I work with here and people I've lived with and been friends with for years. Um, you know, Conservation and no-till have given us time to do some of the things that matter, um, and be involved in the community. Uh, spending less time in the tractor and sometimes more time in the office managing what we're doing, but less time doing things that I don't think are important, uh, like driving a chisel plow back and forth for hours a day. Gives us time to go out and do other things. We get to improve that soil for the next generation, get to leave the farm better than we received it. And that's, I'm not just talking about maintaining, I want to leave it better. And we can build a legacy in our children. So, those are great things. So, sustainability is the buzzword today, right? Everything has to be sustainable, and I think that's it's a great word because it can mean so many things. We're going to go through a little bit of what sustainability is, but um, really from this perspective, we can improve our soil health, which is a huge category. We can increase organic matter. Again, that nutrient efficiency and cycling, uh, increased biology, water infiltration, water holding, drought tolerance, uh, plant health, and and this all comes down to a balance between production today and the impact we have on the future. So, so what is sustainability? I said the definition's a little vague, but um, this is a slide that I stole from my cousin Ken. A lot of you have heard him talk. Um, but you really need to meet the needs of the present without diminishing the ability to meet the future needs. So if we can feed the world today and feed the world tomorrow, then that's our goal, right? And 10 years from now, I think that's the key, is to be able to put our kids through college, but still leave them something in the future, right? So those are all things. There's this balance between the environment, between the social and economic costs of what we're doing, and somewhere in the middle there is a sustainable. And for every one of us, that's going to be different, right? So on our farm, that means one thing. On your farm, that's going to mean something else. If you're going to drive into uh, a new farmer's driveway and sell them something, for it's going to be something different for them. But so this is kind of a moving target, but all of these things, to be truly sustainable, we can't just worry about the environment. We can't just worry about the social implications of affecting the environment. Um, but we can't be like farmers want to be and be just strictly economic and worry about getting the most dollars. There has to be a balance to make this work. Um, building. I love this picture because this is the ways on our farm. A couple of the ways that we capture carbon, and whether it is with a solar panel taking sunlight and converting that into electricity, or a cover crop capturing sunlight and converting that into energy in the soil, which is carbon and organic matter. This is the way. What's important is to take that sunlight energy and capture carbon and energy and put it in the soil. Um, this is just a general graph, kind of that represents what happens on our farm, and what you see across the bottom is the percent organic matter of our soils, and then the yield potential for corn on the left. And what you find is, as the organic matter goes up, the yield potential goes up. Um, this is logical, right? For any of us that have farmed, darker, richer soils yield more, right? So, but but the thing to think about here is, um, you really have an opportunity through these conservation practices to move your curve. And we're going to look at some of our data that shows how we're able to shift that curve and actually bring our organic matter levels up and bring yield up with them. Traditional farming hasn't accomplished this. So this is from the Marrow plots in Illinois. University of Illinois has maintained these plots. They start back in 1880 with the original soil organic matter at 3.85%. And up through the year 2000, we should update this. I'm not sure where things are at right now, but they're, have cut that in by 55%. We haven't even managed to maintain, let alone improve at any point here. It's flattening at the bottom, uh, but certainly this is just not a sustainable approach, and not what we want to leave for head into the future with. So we must, to be sustainable, we got to stop soil degradation and increase soil carbon. We've got to build a soil health system to do this. We've got to have a continuous no-till, not rotational. We have to eliminate these catastrophic tillage events, allow soil to build structure and biology, use cover crops so that there is no erosion, no bare soil, and no leaching of nutrients, and the water goes into the soil where it falls. We can manage our infiltration. So we have that system of no-till, cover crops, soil health, drainage, proper soil balance of chemistry using variable rate for all of our inputs. Of course, you have to match your varieties to your nutrient levels, and planting like no-till, is going to require more plant health and a stronger seedling. Um, Integrated pest management uh, certainly is a big part, because I don't want to be putting pesticides out there and killing beneficials if I can avoid it. Um, and on-farm testing. Uh, we do a lot of that. We're going to see some of the data here in a few minutes, but it's important to know what works on your farm. I can tell you all this and what works on our farm, but if you don't try it on your farm, then it's difficult to really be convinced. Um, Drainage was right up there at the top. That's foundational for us. You can see here. This is just a great example that I use that shows a year, several years ago, where we had this one field that was farmed all together, uh, similar soil types across most of the field. Um, the only real difference is different ownerships and different stages of development of the drainage system. And what you can see is, 50 to 100 bushels of corn difference where the drainage uh, was installed and working properly in a year where we had significant rainfall events. So drainage is obviously critical. Now, at the same time, when we talk about conservation, there's a concern about drainage. I love to share this information from um, uh, Shalimar Armstrong um, at Purdue, and what he has found in some of his research, showing that uh, the worst situation for leaching of nutrients is no fertilizer on bare soil. Um, and that comes from the fact that there's nothing there holding it. All the natural release of the soil just gets flushed out. The best situation, even with drain tile installed, we're monitoring the tile outflows here. The best situation is a cover crop plus a healthy, well fertilized crop. Good growing crops scavenging for those nutrients, um, not fertilized in excess. Uh, but this situation of a good healthy growing crop with a cover crop when the cash crop's not growing, 60% less leaching to the drain tile. So if you're going to install tile and say that's part of the important part of the system, then it becomes important to look at these conservation practices like cover crops to help us keep those nutrients from leaving. Um, you need to get your cover crops planted. right away, whether it's aerial application before harvest. You can put it on with the combine at harvest, or we get out there with a drill the same day as harvest and get those cover crops planted. Because if you're going to grab those nutrients and cycle them and keep them for next year's crop, you've got to start that process immediately. You've got to choose the right cover crop for your goal. Whether you're looking for compaction removal, something that's easy to manage, which is not something to be ashamed of. We do a percentage of our acres in what we consider easy to manage cover crops every year, because you can't have everything uh, that has to be sprayed on the same day in the spring. You've got to have some options. So a cover crop that partially winter kills and doesn't grow too fast in the spring can still do you some good. Disease control, whether it be the nematicide effects of the brassicas or using the cover crop to trick diseases and break cycles and those kinds of things. Obviously, you want to scavenge for nutrients and help cycle those. You want to control erosion. You want to enhance your rotations and overall build soil health. But some cover crops will do some of these better than others, and you have to identify on your farm and in a given field what's the most important attribute that you're looking for. So after that cover crop is planted, just a few weeks later, and we can have a beautiful um, established cover crop in the fall after soybeans. So this is doable in a corn soybean rotation. It's not always easy. You got to get out there quick, but it's doable to have an established cover crop in the fall following soybeans. You know, I just put this in to make that point. If you plant wheat and in the summer, you've got a lot of choices, a lot of warm season cover crops that you can plant and get some tremendous benefits, way more organic matter increases and nutrient production and scavenging than what I can in this corn soybean rotation. And you should take advantage of that. When you get to the middle of September, then that's about the end of the time. So if we have beans come off early, then we can drill some peas and other legumes. Use peas as an example. Uh, Large seeded legumes that are going to take some moisture to germinate and are expensive. Um, so once we get past the middle of September, the growth is limited, and so we start to hesitate on whether we're going to get enough money um, return out of that investment. So up through the 1st of October, oats, radish, rape, and clover, all those things are pretty viable up through the 1st of October. As we get later, the grasses, through late October, we can still get by with annual ryegrass, uh, and all the way really as late as you want to plant for cereal rye in this part of the world, we can keep going. But for specifically you and the cover crop you're looking at, the Midwest Cover Crop Council has a great selector tool that can help you with that. This is an example of planting into corn and soybeans into that green cover crop in the spring. If you've picked your mixes and planted at the right rates, planting into them is not a problem. Um, this is just not going to be able to go through all of these um, mixes here, but what you can see is just beautiful planting conditions down at the seedling level. Um, you know, we're able to get through these cover crops with really minimal planter modifications. Uh, Really nothing except closing wheels on the bean planter uh, and trash wheels and closing wheels on the corn planter. Nothing too fancy, but really using these mixes and we're timing those mixes. The more expensive mixes are earlier uh, in the fall, and the less expensive mixes are going to be planted later. Um, but those kind of mixes will reduce this flooding and erosion. You can see top left, Great example of where the water stopped right when it came even to a small cover crop. And then bottom right, you can see as that water then turned and went across that cover crop uh, through a gully, or what would have been a gully without a cover crop, it actually deposited that soil that it was carrying, and we had clean water leaving that farm. Um, Wind erosion, we don't think a lot about that in Indiana, um, but it's a factor and it happens. This is the same field on the same day, one area with cover crop and one area without. And you can see the difference in the amount of dust that's blowing off on this windy, dry spring day. Um, it's just amazing what even a dead cover crop can do to suppress wind erosion. And this is what we're looking for, right? This is what this is all about. We're trying to generate a healthy soil, um, top to bottom. And you can see this is around Thanksgiving time, and a field that we're putting tile in. You can see the beautiful color in the soil there at the top left. Nice black soil, a nice stand of cover crops there at the top right, and then earthworms and holes and structure. This is what we're looking for. Um, just love that picture. So, can we do all this? Uh, can we can we really store carbon in the soil? Well, here's an example of one of our fields over a 10-year period. We took the soil organic matter from an average on the 1 acre grid. So there's about 70 points in this field, 70 separate soil samples in this field. So it's fairly representative. We went from basically 2.5% to 3.6% on the organic matter over that 10-year period. And that was not a field that had a lot of cover crops during that time frame. We're doing better than that at this point, but that's 1.1% over 10 years, so a little over a tenth of a percent increase in organic matter. Um, this distribution here really shows across our whole farm. So what we've done is we took, um, I'm sorry, I can't see the dates up there. I can't remember, but I think it was 99 to 02 is the red line. So we took all of our soil samples. So we have 6,000 soil sample points from 99 to 02. Excuse me. We had 6,000 soil sample points, and those are all represented in that red curve. And then again from 14 to 18, we took the 6,000 sample points, and those are represented in the blue curve. Now there's some turnover of fields and things like that, so um, it's a little bit understated, but what you can see there is that across the whole farm, we accomplished an increase in organic matter. And if you go back to that curve that we showed early, where a 0.5% of organic matter gives you significantly more yield potential. So I think that's actually being able to accomplish that on every acre of the farm uh, is really amazing. And we really do. We have a long-term plot here that we've worked with CCSI and Purdue and the whole conservation partnership on this plot for probably 12 years now. And and what you can see here is that some covers have done better than others in some years, depending on weather and all sorts of things. But for both corn and soybeans, the worst case is no cover, right? So the covers are producing yield, and that's the yield that we're going to talk about in some of the analysis. We're also monitoring soil moisture recharge, which is improved with cover crops. Soil temperature variability is improved with cover crops. Aggregate stability improved with cover crops. All right, so all of these things with no-till and cover crops and us really a soil health system are really significantly improved. Um, so as we get into the economics of it, just real briefly, I don't think we need to get um, too deep into this other than to say to do the analysis, you've got to know what things cost. So this was just those different cover crop mixes that we were looking at earlier. A couple of years ago, we did this cost analysis just to get a full comparison and an average cost per acre. So our average cost per acre for drilled cover crops in this case at the rates that we were using, about $14.50. Um, so if we take that $14.50, we of course have to account for uh, our planning costs, so our tractor hours, our labor, our fuel, our planter repairs and depreciation that we get on our drill. Even though it's an old drill, it depreciates, and we put a lot of repairs into it when you cover that many acres. So we have so we got a total cost per acre of $22.71 for the cover crops. Now this is where it gets a little fuzzy, and I've used this slide for a couple of years now, and there's going to be disagreements, and I would expect we'll have questions here at the end. Uh, but the bottom line is these are all things that we believe are benefits to conservation on our farm. So we believe that we save fertilizer, partially because we scavenge it and we recycle it, and partially because it doesn't run off with the soil that leaves the farm. All of these things we've proven to ourselves with our 1 acre grid sampling and everything over all these years that we are saving fertilizer. We've proven to ourselves that we're keeping nitrogen from leaching away, and we're producing nitrogen with some of the covers. So again, there's a savings there. You can debate both of those, how much that is, but it's a real thing. We have corn yield that, I've been very conservative here at 7 bushel. If you look at our test plot data over the last 12 years, it's significantly more than that, closer to 10 to 12 bushel, I think. We're reaching now in the latter years of our plot. Our soybean yield increase is actually 4 to 6 bushel. So again, being very conservative here, but trying to get at a number that is a long-term benefit. Um, we have drought tolerance. So if we look at extreme years, right? So we have a normal year-to-year yield increase, and then we have um, an extreme drought tolerance benefit in years like 2012, right? So those years only come along every so often, thank goodness. But when they do, when we have, whether it's a full season drought or these flash droughts that seem to come along more often every year or every other year, we get at least 3 weeks or 4 weeks where we get really dry and really hot, and there's a lot of stress, and so those things generate uh, some yield response that we see. The carbon content in the soil, like we talked about, there's so many benefits beyond just the drought tolerance, um, and really even beyond yield, but they're a little hard to quantify. But the health of that system by improving the energy in the soil through adding organic matter, there's a benefit to that. Erosion reduction. We're way understated here. We just took 2 ton per acre, and what's an acre furrow slice? It's about $4 a ton if you divide it out by the current $10,000 an acre for land. Um, Obviously, the part you lose with erosion is the most valuable part at the surface. So we're way understated here. Um, and then CSP programs, that we just put that in there because that's a legitimate, straight off the books one for us. There's also equip programs, all these other things that can generate money to offset some of your cost. Um, So we put all that together, we get a total benefit. And as you can see, the total benefit significantly, I mean, in this case, 254% return on investment over what we spent on getting cover crops out there. Um, Now, could be wrong, cut it in half, and that's fine. 125% return on investment still very acceptable. If I could make 125% on all my investments on the farm, that would be great. So, um, but that's kind of what I wanted to get at. So, you know, farmers are busy and we can be grumpy sometimes, and don't let that scare you off when you have something to offer, right? As um, a representative of a program or a salesman, if you have something to bring to us uh, that can help us get to that bottom line, then we'll be willing to listen. Um, as a farmer, you can build health in your soil. Um, you can increase your yield, as we've just shown. You can, soil health is a great investment, right? So, of all the places you could put your money, it might be one of the best. Uh, Landowners should be asking for soil health reports, not fertilizer tests, because really this is what's making their land of value for the next generation. And so the soil health we leave for the next generation is a lasting legacy for sure. So
Thanks, Rodney. I'm going to take this opportunity to ask a question or two from the chat, if you don't mind.
yes, absolutely.
What
Let me
is
get a
the
drink here.
best
Sorry.
way to initiate the conversation with a farmer about the use of cover crops on their operation?
So, sorry about that. Um, yeah. So there's a couple of things that I've found to be effective and that work with us and for us. Um, if we're talking, um, one is often if you have a relationship with the landowner, because most farmers today don't own everything that they farm. And so often landowners can be a great tool that can help you initiate the conversation. Um, for us, if our landowner, you know, we're tenants on a lot of these, so if our landlords come to us with questions about this, then that's going to make us real interested in finding out more and going ahead. The other is, of course, you've got to know the farmer that you're dealing with, but some people, as they reach retirement age, are going to be extremely worried about legacy and what they're leaving to their children, and so there's that opportunity. A lot of us. I'm in between now. I used to be in that younger category. I used to do a lot of spreadsheets and worry a lot about the money. Uh, and taking these kind of numbers to a farmer and saying, there is a real economic benefit that is going to help you on your farm. You can take this to your banker and say, hey, this is why we're doing this. Um, so all of those things, it really comes down to getting to know um, the farmer that you're talking to. But I think there's so much data out there now, um, and everyone's familiar. 5 years ago it was hard because people didn't understand it. I mean, we got some crazy questions about what we were planting in our fields, um, but there's at least an understanding now, and so then we've got to have this talk about, what's your legacy, what's the economic benefit, those kind of things.
Thank you. Another question for you. We struggle to get cover crops across every acre from a logistics standpoint. What are you doing on your farm to try and achieve this goal?
So we're a little crazy because we've been doing this for a long time, and so we've seen the benefits and seen the importance. So we've committed to just saying it's going to happen. And so, quite honestly, we've hired help to drive semis and do other things in the fall. And I spend most of the fall in a drill planting cover crops. Not everybody can do that. Obviously, that's not going to work. Maybe you can hire a retiree that can drive a drill for you and run it all day. And yes, there's a cost to that, but I think I kind of showed that's why I wanted to include those costs for that. Um, and maybe it's just not feasible. Maybe you don't have the manpower or the time to manage that. Um, then look at flying it in crop or surface apply it. Um, those methods, as long as they're timed and your seeding selection is correct, work very well too. So that there are ways to do it. My favorite is seed to soil contact with a drill just as fast as you can after harvest. Now we have to plant shorter season soybeans, um, shorter season corn, all of those. There's a lot of things you have to do in a corn and soybean rotation to make that happen. Uh, but if it just comes down to hiring some labor and planting a shorter season variety, um, I think it's worth it.
Thank you.
Rodney, on that same note, do you change your shorter season varieties based on the cover crop you want to plant, or can you go into a little more depth on that based on how you want to seed that cover crop then too, or what time of year it's getting to be, or that sort of thing?
Yeah. So there's it's a little bit of both. So we won't plant a variety that we don't think is going to yield well, obviously, because the economics of our cash crop have to be there. So we're not willing to sacrifice yield, but luckily these days there's a lot of shorter season, both corn and soybean varieties. I mean, not 1.9 soybeans necessarily. We're, for us in this area, we're more in the mid twos to 2.7s, that kind of thing, up to a 3.1 on our soybeans. Um, and 105-day probably on the short side of our corn. So nothing drastic, but be willing to get the dryer going for the corn a little sooner so you can get it off. Be willing to go out there and cut those soybeans the first day that you can, and get those out of the way. So we do everything we can within the economic limits of the varieties that we have to choose from, um, and planting early too. If you can plant early, that's going to help you with earlier harvest and those kind of things. The downside to this healthy soil system is you get less stress at the end of the year, um, which sometimes will make your crops hang on a little longer. So it extends those days back out. But so you've got to do all that up front, but do what makes sense for your farm. Then on the back end, where I went through those 4 different mixes as an example, 2 of those were following corn, 2 were following soybeans. We have a kind of a high cost 4-way mix, following soybeans. That's going to go, first part of September after our first soybean harvest, all the way up through maybe the 3rd week in September. That's going to be, on our good farms, good soils, a lot of potential for that cover crop to do well, and a lot of potential for the corn crop to take advantage of it next year on those good farms. And then later in the season, we're going to drop some of that, like the Balanza clover that I had in there. We're going to drop that out, probably replace some of the oats with rye, things that are less susceptible to the weather as harvest, as we get to our later maturity soybeans. Then we're going to get into less expensive mixes and things that are more winter hardy. Same thing after corn. I don't plant clover after corn, obviously, because we're going to be going to soybeans with that. I don't necessarily want to spend the money on a nitrogen fixer. But we may start with one of those same mixes in order to reduce some of our vol pressure and things like that, with the brassicas going to soybeans the following year in those corn stalks. But as it gets later, corn is generally, we'll try and get soybeans done as quick as we can because you never know what the weather's going to be. So then as it gets later in harvest and the soybeans are done, we're harvesting corn all the way up through, mid to late November, quite possibly. Then I may be down to just a straight cereal rye is the only thing I've got enough heat units left to plant. So it's really a combination of both variety selection and then as harvest progresses and the calendar changes, being willing to adjust what you're planting accordingly.
Thanks, Rodney. There's another question, kind of a 2-part question for you. Do you fly on cover crops? And if so, which ones do you have success with? And then following up to that, do you change your maturity group for either soybeans or corn to be able to get your cover crops on earlier?
Okay. I'll address that second part a little bit. That's a little bit of what I just went through. And so yes, as we've done cover crops, we've moved those maturity groups up, kind of like what I was talking about from maybe a 3.3 to 3.8 in years ago before cover crops, up to a 2.5 to 3.1 on the soybeans, for example, right now. As far as the aerial application, that's a year by year thing for us. So we flew on quite a bit this year, and had pretty good luck with it. So as I said, I like seed to soil contact. So for some of these more expensive mixes, especially, I'm going to tend to try and drill those on. some of the harder seeded covers or larger seeds. You know, it takes, they're fairly expensive, and it takes a higher rate when you surface apply them. So I'm cautious about that. Now, at the same time, I just said a lot of our cover, a lot of our crops come off late, right? So if I've got corn acres that I'm going to be harvesting that I know up front not going to get harvested until November, then sometimes it makes sense if we've got enough moisture and things to go ahead and fly a cereal rye or annual rye uh, into into that corn, because I just know that I'm not going to get it off in time to get a good stand with the drill. So I like to do a 2 or 3 pronged approach where I uh, kind of evaluate that late July, first week of August, and say, how are we doing on soil moisture? How's the crop progressing? When's it going to look like harvest is going to hit? And then we decide how many acres we're going to drill and how many we're going to fly on or have surface plied some other way in crop.
Are you harvesting your own cover crop seeds for planting?
We are not. And I think that there's a lot of value in getting your cover crop seed from a good reputable supplier, I guess is the way I would say it. Um, there's a lot of potential for um, problems, both in just material handling and seed flow in the drill and things like that. If you don't get your seed clean enough, you get chaff and straw in it. We had trouble with that. We have tried harvesting some of our own cover crops. You get chaff and seed, you get storage issues. If it heats during storage, your germination can be pretty poor. Um, I, I I admire people that are committed to doing it and doing it well. Um, we're not. So really what we do is we have found some suppliers that we trust, and they're not the cheapest. We tried, going to the feed mill and getting oats and those kind of things, and doing the cheapest thing that we could do. And what we've found is that knowing the varieties that you're getting, knowing that you're not bringing in noxious weeds and other things, um, is important if you're going to go to the trouble of doing this. So, so no, I guess the short answer is at this point, we're not growing any of our own seed, and we're working with seed suppliers that we trust and know their products.
Great, thanks, Rodney. There's another question here. What's your average annual precipitation?
Oh man. So
Actually, looked that one up.
Yeah.
It's about 40 inches.
Okay. Well, I was
Thanks,
going
Joe.
to say high 40s. So thank you, Joe. So, so yes.
I thought, oh, that's a good question. I'm not sure. But I suspect
so
you're pretty similar to us. So
yeah. Yep. So we're in the mid to high 40s. So it's interesting. We're a hair short usually here on the north side of Annapolis. Annapolis messes up our weather pattern, so we get less than the airport does, even though we're only an hour away. One thing that I think is important to note when we talk about precipitation, I think it's generally the thought, well, the cover crop is going to use up water, and so if it uses up water, I don't have it for my crop. Now, what I've found over the years and talking to people in drier climates that use cover crops is that it's kind of the opposite of that, right? So I'm not an expert, but certainly it seems like the efficiency of water infiltration, the cover in the summer when you have a lot of solar heat and things that would cause that evapotranspiration and water loss from the soil. It actually seems like cover crops, even though it's another growing plant, it's not competing at the same time. And what I've seen is it improves your water efficiency so much that it's not a matter of creating a water shortage unless you let it get out of control at the wrong time in the spring.
Okay, Rodney, you mentioned soil health reports as opposed to soil testing. How are those produced and from what source?
So that's a good question because there's about 15 of them out there now, I think. I've worked with several of them through CCSI and Purdue and different projects that I've been on. I'm not going to go so far as to say any of them at this point are adequate. You know, you've got the Cornell soil test and the Selvita, and there's the Haney test, and um, there's all those tests. They're all at this point, you can pull samples yourself and submit them, or you can work with a consultant that can do that. Um, there's a lot of interpretation and understanding and dependence on the weather when the test is pulled, and all sorts of things that we don't understand yet. But there's some base level science there, and especially if you have a comparative sample for, you know, what is it that this soil was, right? So you have a starting point. I think that helps. We're not to the point where we can go to the landlord and say, hey, look at this cool straight line improvement that we're getting, because we haven't got that kind of correlation and understanding to the tests, but it's coming.
Ronnie, do you know about what percentage around you is no-tilled and or cover cropped?
Seems to be growing a little bit every year, but it's not overwhelming. um, we're up here in uh, Tipton and Hamilton counties in Indiana, for those of you from around here that know that. And there's a lot of no-till soybeans. I'm going to say 80 or 90% of the soybeans are no-tilled, but not so much corn. I think we're probably 20, 30% no-till corn. And I don't really know on cover crops, maybe 10%, maybe less, something like that.
So on that same note, and sort of getting back to what we had originally asked you to talk about too, but maybe kind of flipping it on its head, we have a comment and a question here. As an involved landowner, they're challenged to get an operator to commit to implementing some of these conservation practices and to consider legacy conservation, soil health, profits, et cetera. So how do they go about finding someone to farm that ground that has some of those interests, do you think?
Okay. Yeah, I mean, if you're lucky enough to be able to drive around and see some cover crops and and find out whose farm that is, that's a good place to start. But we're not all it's not always easy to find that out or to find those things. So, you know, your soil and water district is can be a great resource. Um, and maybe depending on your relationship with your district, obviously they're not going to just give out names, but often you can talk to them and find out, you know, who would be willing to answer questions about different who was doing these soil health practices, or even just you know, join in at a go to a soil and water district annual meeting in your county, and the people that are there are going to be of that mindset, I guess, to a large degree. So that's going to be a good opportunity. Um, Sometimes, you know, if you're working with a bank or a farm manager, you know, they may have customers that they deal with that they'll say, yeah, you know, we get a lot of references from our bank, uh, and you know, they'll tell people that, hey, you know, these guys are kind of doing what you're looking for. And so, yeah, I don't think there's not a registry yet There are some services out there that are trying to match people up, but I don't know how effective those are yet. But yeah, it's going to be a matter of talking to um, some people in the community.
Great. Next question. What seed suppliers do you trust?
Well, I don't want to advertise for anybody, but there are a bunch of uh, good suppliers out there now. Um, so, we use
Well, I
a
suppose
lot of, uh-huh,
maybe
go ahead.
how do you go about building those relationships too, right? If you're, the whole topic here is about kind of building relationships and working with folks, how do you do that with your seed suppliers too?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it was easier pre 2020 when you could actually go to a trade show and talk to them. that, that helped. But even then, right. So, the National No-Till Conference is a great resource for no-tilling and cover crops and soil health and all these things. So that was all virtual this year, but you can still contact those sponsors from those uh, seed companies. Those people are directly invested in no-till and pretty well vetted. You can, um, a lot of we buy a fair amount of seed. Again, I don't want to advertise, but just because of locality here, we've got a long-term relationship with Beck's Hybrids, and we're dealers for them. We buy a lot of seed through Beck's. They have a relationship with Cisco as well as some others. There's, um, but I think the key is if it seems too cheap, it probably is. That's usually where I find people or have found people that get in trouble. This deal was just so good I couldn't pass it up. Well, it's a pretty competitive industry. Most of these seeds, I mean, take ryegrass for example, is one of the most competitive industries. I don't know how those guys survive on the margins they make on seed, because it doesn't just go to cover crops. It goes into a huge commodity market. Um, and, there shouldn't be a lot of variability in price. It's kind of like corn. If somebody has corn they want to sell you really cheap, you got to wonder why. Um, and it might end up costing you more in the long run. Um, so if it's too cheap uh, to be believed, then maybe you shouldn't. Um, and you just want to be sure that person you're dealing with has a history of producing a quality product, with good germination standards, and that they've got a good cleaning process and bagging process, that you're not going to get a lot of junk, and you're not going to get a lot of noxious weeds and those kind of things in there. So I think, like I said, there's so many good suppliers out there now. This industry has really developed, and it's continuing to develop. And I think if you just talk to people, you can get a feel for it pretty quick. And especially if you're just getting started in cover crops, your dealer, or the company that you're buying from can be a really good resource, because they know people who are in your area doing what you're trying to do, and they can tell you what works and what you're going to need to do, and what the best choices might be. So it can be a really valuable relationship as we're learning these things.
Great, thanks. Are you doing any interseeding in the V4 to V9, and why or why not?
Um, we're not, and there really isn't a why or why not, other than we don't have the equipment, and we've been concerned about chemical programs and those kinds of things, and so we haven't invested in the equipment. Um, and I think it's really an intriguing process, and I'm kind of excited every time I get to see some data on how it's working, and and seeing where it goes. It's just not something, you know, we it's kind of like the whole talk today. You know, you want me to try one more thing. Well, this just isn't one of those one more things we've done yet.
As you are changing your cover crop decisions there right at the end of the season, you know, as you're getting up into winter, what do you do with that seed? Do you already have the seed on hand? And then what do you do with that seed if you don't end up planting it because you changed the decision of what you were going to plant? Does that keep, or how do you go about doing that?
Yeah. So luckily at this point, we've been doing it long enough. I've gotten really good at it, at guessing, you know, maturities and when those timelines are going to be. So I don't have much carryover like I used to. And the reality is most of what I buy now, I buy those 3 mixes that we use. I go ahead and get those bulk mixed, and I'll be a little bit conservative on what I think I can get planted of each one in a timely fashion. And so unless harvest just goes sideways in a big way, um, I'm usually, I will push the last few acres of each one of those different mixes probably gets planted a few days later than it should. But I go ahead and do that because I have it on hand. If you're dealing with what I used to do when I didn't have as good a handle on it, I would buy unmixed individual products. And for most of the companies, if you end up with a few bags of radish or rapeseed left over, um, or something like that, you can return those. So I would buy them unmixed and then use a feed mixer, um, basically to put it in and mix batches and go from there. Um, Obviously, at this point, we're doing so many acres, it's just too much to do that anymore. But I do know people that have put in mixers right on site, tub mixers and things that they still do that themselves, and that's a great way to do it because it leaves you flexible. Once you mix those products, there's really no returning them, so you're going to have to store them. A lot of these things, if you store them someplace dry and clean, you can get away with it for a year. Germination may go down a little bit on the oil seeds, but you can get by with storing them if you have to. Um, but hopefully, if you've got that good seed supplier that you're working with, you can work something out with them if you've got unopened bags that you can return.
Looks like we had just one more come in, and I'll ask that quick, and then I think we can turn it back over to you, Lisa. But how do you worry about soil moisture when you are planting your cover crops? The comment is that they struggle every year planting their cover crops into dry soils. So do you have a go or no go on soil moisture levels?
Um, yes, a little bit, especially with aerial seeding. Um, I look at surface applied versus drilled as being about a 2-week lag. So if I'm looking at aerial seeding and the crops and it's dry and there's, you know, a couple weeks here with no forecast for rain or not enough rain that it's going to get it to grow, and I know that those crops are going to come off and I could get it drilled and into the soil, then I'm going to defer, at least on those acres that I'm going to get harvested relatively soon. I'm going to defer to drilling to get that soil contact. Um, Now, once I go to the drill, I used to have a lot of trouble. I had different Coulter drills, Great Plains and Tie and things, and trying to do a lot of stalking, yeah, a lot of chopping of the stalks. Um, but they weren't great at seed to soil really pressing in. We went to the Deere 1990 a few years ago, after using some 15-inch planters, which also were very good at really packing that soil around that seed and cutting through the residue and getting it down into the soil. The biggest thing is I quite often will go a little deeper than you would expect in the fall if I'm searching for moisture. Because for the most part, you don't have near as much of the crusting problems and things. If you were to get a rain, it doesn't tend to get hot and crusty and have emergence trouble like you would be concerned about in the spring. So if I'm planting, something that I would like to plant at a 1/4 inch to 1/2 an inch deep and it's really dry, I might drop that on down or crank up the pressure and try and get it down there to 3/4 of an inch to an inch to get after that moisture and get it locked in. And we have pretty good luck with this setup that we're using now with that deer drill and making sure you've got the pressure on it to get it locked down in the soil. We get most of ours up without any rain. So.
Wow, that was a lot of great questions. Thank you, everyone, for
Yeah.
typing those in. Great interaction. Want to thank Rodney again for being with us this morning. Great information. We really appreciate you being here with us this morning. And to everybody who's still on the webinar, again, this is being recorded. Give us some time and we will get that edited and post it to both our YouTube channel and with a link to our website.